Hi all, there was another incredibly instructive game played in the Tata Steel Tournament Weekend Z. In round 9, Magnus Carlsen, who was on a winning streak, was playing Radjabov. Playing white, Magnus kicked off with e4. We saw a very solid reply from Radjabov. Now I believe what we're about to see in this game is very instructive from the point of view of encouraging a bad bishop and then exploiting it. So let's see how Magnus does this, and which bishop will it be? Will it be this one or this one, do you think? Knight f3, knight c6, classic royal pairs so far, nothing unusual. We have now the Russian system, knight f6, the early knight f6 here without a6, that's the most common move, but knight f6 without a6. d3 now is played. This avoids a lot of more theoretical lines with castles, so this is a rarer bird, but Magnus is trying to create a game where it's more about the player's imagination rather than what they know from their knowledge base. So we have here bishop c5 now. This is the most common move. So can you guess, will it be this bishop or this bishop targeted by this instructive game? Castles, and we have d6. The bishops, both bishops, seem okay for the moment. This bishop is the more aggressive one, pointing at f2 outside of black's pawn chain. Knight bd2. After castles, Magnus voluntarily gives up his light squared bishop now with bishop takes c6, so not even waiting for any a6. B takes c6. Now this bishop is free on that diagonal, and Magnus provides a target for it, h3, but it's difficult to exploit this h3 right now. The more important thing is perhaps to deprive black of that g4 square. That bishop is looking at f2, so it would be nice tactically sometimes to put more pressure on f2. We see h6, which deprives, by the same token, the g5 square. Later, with that bishop there, a knight move and a bishop g5 could be annoying for black, very annoying indeed. So depriving the g5 square pin, which would be especially painful with the bishop here, is important for black. In fact, theoretically, I guess this would be the top move. Only 3 games, so we're kind of out of book already from live book. You know, both players are starting to be on their resources. Rook e1. If you look at black's pawn structure, d5 is very inhibited here. There's always going to be ED and pressure on e5. Black, as though, supports the idea that in the future, again, d5 might be playable. For the moment, it's locked down. So with this structure, remember, these pawns are now on the dark squares. Same with that bishop. Magnus actually, with the pop quiz question, which bishop to target, it's the structure here which determines that this bishop is actually quite targetable, in theory, more than this one, to try and hem in. And we're going to see some wonderful stuff now to try and hem this bishop in, or even encourage the opponent to hem in his own bishop. We see now the move knight f1. Here again, d5 is always inhibited because we've got that pressure against the e5, this prophylaxis move, and this was prophylaxis against any knight g4, so there's no problem with f2. We see now a5 from black, gaining a bit of space. Knight g3, the knights look very comfortable here. Rook b8. Magnus is not afraid now to play b3 to blunt that rook in that b file to free his bishop, his own bishop. Bishop b4. Now Magnus offers actually an exchange of this bishop, but if black did take on d2, I don't think this would be very wise. There's a target here on a5, and it's a fixed target. For example, a4 fixes it, and white would have a small advantage positionally. Nevertheless, it should be considered to play things like bishop takes d2 sometimes. But here, okay, rook a8 is played. And now actually we have the move c3, bishop goes to c5. And now d4, so this bishop is being restricted on this diagonal. Black doesn't really want to release the central tension here. This knight's doing a fine job of supporting e4, so ED is not a problem for white. In fact, white might have a nice option in knight takes d4 here, as well as cd, to eye the f5 square, as well as hitting c6. So for example here, we're looking at f5 quite comfortably, move like queen f3, and we've got attacking pressure. So black's not too keen to do that. Plays bishop b6. Okay, so the bishop's only slightly restricted. You might think, well, it's quite an attacking bishop, isn't it, on b6? Why would this game be instructive for trying to do something with this bishop here? Well, this is an opportunity though. Black didn't release that central tension. White starts to increase the positional advantage around this bishop. Structurally, now, these double pawns look a bit more wretched with this next change in pawn structure. D takes e5. It creates a fixed pawn on e5, and it kind of isolates away these pawns. These are kind of isolated pawns now. These two islands here, the number of pawn islands have gone up, but with the bishop pair, is this such a big deal? And in fact, this next move seems maybe on the surface a bit strange. c4, because doesn't it give the d4 square away? Thing is, does black really want to play a move like bishop d4? Now the real problem now is in the future c5 would really inhibit that bishop and force it to go here, and that will start to look really horrible for its prospects. You can imagine a pawn here with these double pawns. They're not going to move. The mobility is already restricted. It's never going to come out on this diagonal. Often in, for example, the English opening with an early bishop c5 or bishop b4 systems, this bishop is also the basis of white's positional strategy. It's a piece which can be more easily hemmed in than this bishop. That's got scope, but white can use his pawns to try and imprison this dark square bishop often in lines of the English opening, and here it's the case where, okay, a slight compromise of the d4 square, but overall it would seem beneficial to try and hem it in. We see now a positional maneuver aimed at d4 from black, knight h7. So the idea, for example, like this, to try and use this hole is a long-term idea and very noble one. If black played bishop d4, okay, black's getting rid of that potentially bad bishop, but for example, knight takes. This is a pleasant position for white, just structurally. White can play queen c2 and follow up with this. It's just an unpleasant position. e5 is also potentially a target later, or the queen. It's a nice position. Black doesn't really want to give up the bishop like that. On e takes, then again, now we have some other issues positionally. It's a pleasant position, but maybe even e5 gets white a small advantage. This kind of structure is very dangerous for black, or even queen h5. It's a nice pawn wedge, attacking pawn wedge, and white's pieces are looking at black's king side quite comfortably. So it's not ideal to play this bishop d4. So it remains a problem piece potentially, but black's got a plan to save this bishop, around this bishop as well. If he can do this, then maybe even an outrageous c5 becomes justifiable to give that knight a fantastic looking square in principle on d4, which could help liberate the bishop later if it's taken on d4. Let's see if this really happens though. Queen e2. Okay, you might think, well, why didn't the queen go to c2, by the way, to support c5? Why queen e2? Well, actually, queen c2 is less flexible for the queen. The queen has still got possibilities of coming to the king side later on e2, and maybe white doesn't have to be in a rush to play like this. But also bishop e3, just challenging that bishop. It wouldn't mind. Magnus wouldn't mind an exchange still. Knight f8, and we do see this bishop e3. So it seems a positional threat is really on the cards with c5 here, with the queen having the flexibility to still go to the king side later. And it's here, this next move here has come under great scrutiny from black. Perhaps black's best bet here in assessing the positions, the resulting positions, is to play the trade bishop takes e3. White has a small advantage, but should it be necessarily terminal in this position? the long-term structural advantage he's accumulating a la Steinitz, and robbing black of the bishop pair, which was one of the compensations. I think that seems to be the big problem. If you can damage structure and get rid of the opponent's bishop pair, then you're sort of having your cake and eating it. There's no real downside, it seems here, just white's a little bit better for the long term, for the foreseeable future. So maybe, black played an adventurous idea here, which is mentioned previously. He actually imprisons his own bishop. It looks on the surface a vile move to play, reducing the bishop to a kind of pawn. Is he playing drafts with his pawn structure and the bishop here? So they all have to be on the diagonal adjacent to each other. The bishop is hemmed in and is also kind of weakened d5 as well. But the plan, I believe, will twofold. The threat from white to address was c5, to put the bishop on a7, which is even worse in many respects. That would also not just hem in the bishop, but give white the c4 square. You can imagine manoeuvres like this later as well to celebrate the c4 square and keep the bishop hemmed in. And also a5 and e5 will be under scrutiny. Imagine a knight here. It would be a nightmare. So there's a few reasons for stopping white from playing c5. If you don't believe that, let's just have a look at that position. If we allowed c5 from white, again, it's got no prospects on this diagonal. It's really quite bad there. If we just follow this through, we can support this c5 pawn. And I think we can start to think, well, actually we can even think of the light squares here, so we might not even use c5 in a hurry, I mean the c4 square, but this is very pleasant for white, this kind of position. We can actually start attacking the pawns as well. That bishop is like playing a piece down, so it's not pleasant to allow c5 from white. So perhaps best overall, it seems, bishop takes e3 must be a serious candidate. Okay, c5, and that will make this game memorable if it works or not. Rook a d1, hitting the queen goes to f6, funny enough. You might think, why does the queen go to f6, where it can be a subject of tempo gain, to knight h5? Let's see, if queen e7, I think this is okay as well. It's playable to play queen e7. I think maybe black wasn't too bothered clearly about knight h5. The queen might also be a target potentially to knight f5 in the future if white can arrange it. This position a4, we can fix down black's pawn structure starting with a4, and it's still quite nice for white. And in fact, we can even start working on e5 maybe, maneuver the bishop here. So anyway, queen f6 seems to want to provoke knight h5. So Magnus actually plays that. So where does the queen want to go here? If the queen goes to g6, then knight h4 actually protects the knight and hits the queen again. And this looks ridiculous if the queen goes to h7. Queen f3, and white is getting some nice pressure, and it's like playing a piece up with this terrible bishop here. White's got things like knight f5 to try and get rid of the light square bishop, the more useful one, and then start building more advantage there. That looks unpleasant. So actually the queen just went to e7 here, and it seems a nice fixing move to play a4, a tempting one, but actually Magnus played on the king side another interesting idea. He's not too bothered clearly about a4 for black. It's not a major positional activity threat if black plays a4. I mean, it can just be safely ignored. It wasn't even played actually. Black just played king h7, which seems a bit strange, getting the king out more in the open air. Potentially it's more checkable on h7, you might think, but it's trying to create some solidity around these key squares which might be vulnerable later to things like knight g4. The knights are scrutinizing these poor pawns, and they're terrorizing these two pawns here on the king side. So king h7 played. It's an interesting move, so let's go on from that. Or, one moment, hold on, the master plan, before we look at king h7, we'll carry on from there. The master plan here of knight e6 to d4, why wasn't that played? This is a big question of the game. This was an opportunity right here, after knight h2, to play knight e6. Wasn't this the master plan to get a knight to d4? And I think it's worthy of testing. Let's have a look. Knight e6. It might be one of the better moves available to black to play knight e6. In fact, it seems very, very logical and consistent. The one slight downside I've detected in prior analysis is queen f3. It seems white has a certain pressure to bear on the king side. If black goes too much all in with knight d4 as a first example, queen g3 we can see threatening mate, and also bishop takes h6. And this starts to be really unpleasant. If f6, we then play bishop takes here, nasty. So if black's forced to play a horrible looking move like g5, it looks ridiculous. If he doesn't want to lose material, he's just weakened the light squares here. And white can now do a timely transaction. First, force some more pawns on light squares and try and make use of the f5 square and g4 square. For example, like this, we can see actually in this kind of scenario there's also tactics available. The queen's not even hanging here. Bishop takes d4. White can get a big positional grip on the f5 square, and this bishop will still be kind of dead and behind its own pawns locked in like a prisoner. So it doesn't really help to have that kind of light square bind inflicted. So possibly, this is speculation now, queen f3 put black off this early knight e6, but he doesn't actually have to play knight d4. Other possibilities here, after queen g3 it's just very unpleasant. So black's in advance of this queen maneuver, seemingly trying to sort out g7, by maybe giving other resources to defend and getting out of this bishop takes h6. So it seems sensible in its own right that king h7 in advance, like Petrosian would try and snuff out the opponent's attacking plans before they dreamt of them. But it seems at the expense of this knight e6 to d4 idea. But in that example, it's not working. But before we give up on it, black here might consider other moves, not king h7 here, because there's things like queen f5 check, which is clearly dangerous for e5, or knight g4 is actually quite strong as well, looking at e5, and again queen f5. No, but actually black might change the king defense policy to king h8 here, and still have this idea maybe of knight d4. Queen g3 here, scrutiny on the king side, f6, queen h4, now threatening things like bishop takes h6, is very, very dangerous. But it seems black, if black was playing defensively like a computer and not worrying too much about the light squares, this move g5 here, it just has echoes of what we just previously witnessed. If black really starts putting all the pawns like drafts on dark squares, literally, it seems every single pawn in this variation is on a dark square and plays like this. What white does is simply a light square strategy. He just exploits the light squares. For example, just taking here immediately, knight g4, the knights are doing a really good job running rampant. And if black ever takes it, then we've got that f5 square to work with. We can put a knight on f5. It's a positional advantage in that respect on the light square complex at least. But possibly, this is an interesting continuation. From an engine's perspective and from a positional perspective, it looks like craziness to do this, absolute craziness. But it does implement what I thought when looking at the game yesterday was black's main idea, to get a knight to d4. Because how else do you justify that self-hemming, self-imprisonment with c5? It doesn't seem there's a clear bust for black here. That's the point really. And technically the position is just about equal here. It's given about 0.08 by Stockfish. Very, very equal from an engine point of view. It might have been the right way to approach the position. So that's another example of knight e6. Why, okay, it might actually be playable with the right king move, with the exact right defense. This might be playable. Other ideas here. After queen f3, king h8, queen g3. This position, if knight d4 was played here instead of g5, you might think that's sensible. Then black just basically gets hacked on the king side. The knight's actually not having a fantastic influence here. It's striking out on squares that are not that relevant for defending the king. Bishop takes is actually quite crushing here. This kind of tactical idea is really quite bad for black. It seems knight takes and a rook can swing in. So black can be in ruins on the king side if he's not careful, if he is too premature to entrench a knight on d4. So very, very careful balance of a knight maneuver and king safety is needed here. So black was trying to get this right perhaps with king h7. Now we're going to go on for this. Queen f3, putting more pressure on the king side. f6. So it's like playing a piece up though for the moment. If that bishop really isn't supporting knight e6 to d4, what is it doing on b6? Hasn't white actually got extra attacking pieces against the king? Knight g4 now threatens actually quite nasty tactics. Any knight taking f6 is on here actually. Black actually tried to snap that off now. He felt he had to snap that off. Let's demonstrate why. Let's give a token move to demonstrate why. Just an irrelevant move. Let's take on f6. King moves somewhere. We take here. Queen f6. Rook d8. Things can get really nasty. Once you strip the king, all these tactics emerge. You know, with the extra tempo on the king checks can cause devastation like this. What does black do here? He's just losing material. So yes, how else does black react? He has to give up his bishop pair. It's another major positional concession. One of the upsides from black's point of view earlier surely was this light square bishop. He's having to give it up here. So it's non-controversial, less controversial now. White is systematically building his advantages up by destroying the previous upsides, you know, of black having the bishop pair. What else does black do? You might think, okay, connect the rooks as a defensive try. It doesn't seem to work. Again, tactically, it seems that knight h takes f6 is strong here. For example, this position, queen g3 check, we're picking up potentially e5 if that's not protected. Now in this position, it's still a strong attacking position. f4, taking here, and there's a lot of pressure. You know, bishop e5, check, rook f1, the f file. It's an unpleasant position for black. This position here. In fact, with playing like a piece up, if the bishop goes on this diagonal, it's unchallenged. So that's what really actually strengthens the attack. This bishop's just dead. If we try and get it out, does that work? Rook d6. Yeah, there's tactics all of a sudden. If here, there's tactics like on the king side and other tactics. Okay, so okay, this is a really dangerous position for white to allow a knight sack, it seems, tactically. So bishop e6 doesn't seem too hot. Any king move doesn't seem too hot. So we get this bishop takes g4. Queen takes g4. So it's again like playing a piece up on the king side. For the moment, the free attacking players are these guys, but maybe a rook can also swing in this position. Let's see. Rook ed8. For the moment not, of course. Black contesting that d-file, stopping such a swinging operation, which looks like a classic routine when you've got a space advantage or a mobility advantage to try and emphasize the rook movements to go for the attack. Queen f5 check now is played. And yeah, black hasn't really got g6 here. It seems tactically just queen takes f6 will do. Yeah, with the queen hanging on e7. The knight's protecting the queen. Knight g6 is not particularly brilliant either. It's a horrible pin to be left in. So here, after the check, the king just went back, trying to minimise the damage here. Now Magnus, yeah, with this bishop like playing a piece up, he wants to actually add some more targets. So this is a great exploitation. He adds more targets. By this move, f4, he's trying to actually isolate now black's pawns even more. If he can isolate a pawn here, it's a target on e5. It wouldn't be very nice, I think, for black to take on f4 here, Although, what else? He does actually exchange rooks and then takes on f4. If he takes on f4 immediately, this is just a pleasant position either way. You know, white can have knight takes f4, bishop takes f4, and it's just an enjoyable position. There's e5 on the card to try and wrench open this diagonal, playing a bishop up, basically a dark square bishop up with this bishop here. So g7 would be a massive target if e5 to try and further put pressure on this poor structure here. Okay, so but rook takes d1 and e takes played here. So now immediately e5 is a major thing for black to worry about. The whole pawn structure is under great scrutiny here now, with f5 being the key threat. So playing like a dark square bishop up now. It's a real tragedy. It seems this knight e6 to d4 maneuver just never happened. I mean, if it's played here, this is far too late, by the way. e5. Does it do anything? Knight d4? Not really. Black just gets wrecked. E takes, because we're hitting the queen. This position here is not ideal with a rook coming to the 7th rank. Again, the bishop's dead in these variations. It's just totally lost positionally. So it never really got a chance for that maneuver. So queen e6 was played, and now Magnus is so happy with his positional advantage. He's not desperate to keep the queens on. He plays rook d3. He controls that d file. So does black really want to exchange off queens? Does it really relieve any pressure? He'll be playing like a piece down. Let's test it for a moment, because you might think, well, a4, if that wasn't locked down. If we take here and then play a4, does this help black's cause? Not particularly. White's strongest might be rook g3, just targeting g7. And this check, I think it's just harmless. Just white is like playing a piece up. Again, it echoes white's playing a piece up. And in fact has gorgeous tactics here. Bishop takes is crushing. For example, like this, threatening mate on g8. That's picking up material if black's forced to do that. And mating by force. So this would be diabolical. Playing a bishop down is just not pleasant. It's just lost, basically. This position, black gets munched on the king side. So yes, the a4 plan is not really helping after the queen exchange either. White's positional advantage and ability for rook g3 is just crushing here. So rook e8 is played. Now a fine combination here from this position. White to play, what would you play as white? So you're playing basically a bishop up. This is one game you don't want to mess up, because you're in a winning position. You don't want regrets from messing up winning positions. Is Magnus going to mess this up? Is he worried? Black seems to be threatening queen takes e4. Is the e-pawn a problem? Sometimes when you're in a winning position, I think it's nice to be able to play forcing sequences to force your way to victory without any controversy. You want to minimize the controversy. So is there a powerful forcing move in this position? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video now. Okay, so Magnus is in forcing mode now. He actually plays knight takes g7. Remarkable idea, ripping apart this pawn chain. Classic thing which attacking players do. They focus on the defensive pawn chains and how they can undermine them tactically, either with pieces or their own pawns. And here it's been ripped to shreds. So white's basically playing a piece up as well. The first thing to look at here, if queen takes e4, in this position, yes, doesn't that seem good? Well, actually queen takes f6 though, leaving the rook hanging, is justifiable, because here we have knight takes e8 check and mating. So this would be actually quite an unpleasant position. h6 is attacked, the rook's attacked for the discovered check. There's nothing black is doing here. It's playing like a bishop down. It's hopeless. So yeah, he takes this, and now we see queen h5, and this bishop is really doing wonders compared to this one, attacking black's h6 here, that crucial h6, and also the rook g3 is going to be weaving a mating net. Rook g3 driving the king back, and then queen h6 is going to be mating that in 4 if not attended to. So black tries to arrange the best possible defense, and this looks like one of the best possible defensive moves in the circumstance, knight h7. But forcing moves a lot of the way now. Bishop takes h6, king goes back to h8. Why is this dangerous? Queen g6, it's terminal. It's absolutely really terminal, this position. If rook g8, white has a crusher here, because that would seem on the surface to defend g7. Guess what white would play in this variation, if I give you 5 seconds, starting from now. White would have rook d8, pinning the rook, deflecting it away from g7, threatening here, and bishop g7. There's no defense there. The engine indicates a mate in 3. If knight f8, we just take here. Yeah, it's just desperate defense. There's nothing there after rook d8. So queen g8 was played. Cruelty, careful, beautiful calculation here at this phase of the game of playing basically a virtual piece up. What does white play in this position? Test your tactics. 5 seconds. The unfortunate specific configuration of black's position, bishop g7, this rook will be loose on queen takes. And here we're going into a terrible ending. Black played queen f8. If he plays knight f8, this is really of course still a fantastic position for white. I think probably the most incisive move is e5, just with the ideas like of e6 or even e takes, but e6 or e takes. What does black do here? Say takes, then there's rook f3. Say here, trying to cling on. This position is just remarkable. King h2 now threatens rook g3. How does black defend against rook g3? Can't. He's just falling to bits here. He's just playing a bishop down. It's just like rook against knight in effect. There's no help from any other resources. We just play rook g3. So that's not too palatable, knight f8. So we see queen f8. Magnus now plays another strong move. I think probably most moves, a lot of moves are winning here, including, I mean, maybe even queen takes is better for white, but doesn't want to give black much wriggling room. He plays a move here which stares at things like g8. Okay, so we see now queen h6, and then this move e5 is really strong. Lots of threats like rook g3 coordinating on g8 and putting more pressure on black. Queen c1 check, king h2, queen f4 check, and now we see this coordination on g8, threaten mate. And here, black resigned. Let's have a look at this potentially hopeless ending with knight g5. So this is on move 14. Knight g5. If knight g5 had been played, well, I can even just go into the ending, rook against knight and bishop here. If you look at this ending with this, again, this dead bishop, and black has to defend that pawn as well. Rook g7 would totally restrict the king. This would be obscene, actually, because we have a dead piece here and a dead king there. White can actually just move his pawns up, with black doing virtually nothing against this. What does black do once he exchanges there? Does the bishop come out for the rescue? I don't think so. This position is just white avalanching on the king side. This is just enough to avalanche the pawns. It's pretty hopeless cause here. For example, like this, if we have the two connected pass pawns, they're going to win. Even if the bishop does get out, it's too kind of late in the day for it. Okay, so that's far from the end point of the game. Let's go back just to demonstrate that potential ending there. It's pretty hopeless. So queen takes f6 is good, just for that ending. So rook g7 knight d6. I mean, white can even just stop this bishop. In fact, more instructive here, positionally, we will just want to just fix this bishop down, perhaps a4, so it doesn't even have any life, except if it tries to get back on this diagonal. And again, let's look at this scenario. White can just play rook g6. If here, f7, so that would be winning. So this pawn is really dangerous. So if the knight's the only thing stopping the pawn, now again, build up on the king side. Bishop tries this side to get out. Okay, this scenario again, it's pretty helpless, really. These variations here is winning material. If black doesn't do that, white's just going to play. Well, he's hitting the bishop anyway. If the bishop goes back, we just play g5. These pawns will be winning. It's like, yeah, the rook against knight again. If this bishop's not helping, then it's not particularly great news. The pawns just carry on marching through to this kind of scenario again. So the bishop's pretty hopeless in this ending. So this is after, yeah, in the final position, yeah, if this knight g5, it's only a temporary defense. Even more incisive than queen takes f6 might actually be queen e7 though. Apparently queen e7 might actually be technically stronger, threatening e takes. What does black actually do here in this position? It's like +7. If black actually is immediately falling apart, there's even no need to go into that endgame to try and demonstrate the rook against knight and bishop. Black's actually just falling apart here in this position, with e takes f6 being threatened. The knight can't move because of queen g7. It's like the bishop's out of the game for king safety, and yeah, there's just no move here. This would just be giving up a piece for totally dead bishop against rook ending. So even simpler than the other endings. We just get the king out to stop the pawn, keep the rook restricting the king. Yes, a positional masterpiece. It's just a total positional masterpiece with nice tactical forcing sequence at the end to push the game through to victory without any controversy. Okay, so black resigning after rook g3. Poetry in motion again. So yes, the opening set the scene for black having the bishop pair, and for this bishop being the chosen one to encourage its imprisonment, self-imprisonment in fact. You might think, well, okay, yeah, take off on d2, but no, it became a very bad piece. Or play bishop d4, or play for knight e6 at some point. Here, by the way, there was no knight e6 because the knight takes e5. That's good for white. The tactics don't really favour black too much there. So without the knight e6 to d4 plan available, yes, it's a hard job for black here, but possibly this is the moment he could have taken on e3 instead. It seems, yeah, people will for years after think, oh, why did he just imprison the bishop? I think the principal concept there, he was off put by the kingside operations, the potential of the kingside operations, favouring this in advance of queen f3 to g3. That's my opinion of king h7, why this knight e6 wasn't played. It was, but then, yeah, we see it never being played, and black's just made to look silly as a result. Why did he do this to himself? Yes, it's just brutal, the game now, after knight takes g7, going into a horrid forcing sequence where black just never really got a chance. A masterpiece. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.